I am super fascinated about plants and herbs, and not just because of their medicinal benefits, even though that in and of itself is super fascinating, but also the myths, the legends, the stories, the traditions around a plant. And I really feel like I want to learn as much as I can about this subject. And I thought, what better way to learn than to pretend to already be the wise person that I really wish to be. And so that is what I'm doing. Pretending to be wise and knowledgeable. I just really thought that maybe if I present to you the knowledge that I find on this subject, I will be able to keep the knowledge in my head for a lot longer than if I just learned for myself and just read and listen to stuff by myself. So this was completely just me trying to learn as much as I can, and maybe documenting the process along the way. Today, in this very first presentation, the premiere is about what is herbalism. Even though I really do wish I would already be the wise person that knows everything and has all the answers, alas, I am not yet that person. And I know for a fact that I will make mistakes. So if you're interested in this subject as well and you want to learn, then take everything that I say with a grain of salt, because I will make mistakes. Some things for sure will not be 100% accurate, and of course I'm doing my best, but you never know. I might also be spitting out bullshit, who knows. But without further ado, let's get into it. What better way to start a presentation than with a good old definition from some fancy dictionary. And today's fancy definition will come from Merriam-Webster, which states that herbalism is the art or practice of using herbs and herbal preparations to maintain health and to prevent, alleviate, or cure disease. That also includes creating teas, salves, tinctures, extracts, that sort of thing. That sounds really straightforward, doesn't it? And I really wish it were that straightforward, but I found out in my research that it's not that straightforward. There is a little bit more confusion to what herbalism is than just that. But we'll get into that in a bit. First of all, I would like to talk a little bit about the history of herbalism. People have been using herbal medicines for a really, really, really long time. And the oldest written evidence that we currently have is of a Sumerian clay slab from Mesopotamia, which would be today's Iraq, which was from around 5,000 years ago. On one of the specific clay slabs that were found, there were 12 recipes written for different drug preparations, and it referred to 250 different types of plants, which also included poppy, the good old opium plant, then henbane, which I've actually never heard of before, but apparently it's very toxic, and mandrake, the Harry Potter screaming plant. Even though that is the oldest written evidence that we have at the moment, it's quite like no one actually knows when herbalism started, because the knowledge was always passed down orally before it was written down. So it could be that, we've been using herbs as medicines since we exist, and there's no real way to know if we did or didn't. What I find very interesting is that a lot of the modern medicines that we use nowadays actually come from or are inspired by the herbal knowledge of local people, of native people. And in fact, 25% of prescription drugs in the US contain at least one active ingredient of a natural plant part. And actually nowadays, these active ingredients aren't natural anymore. They don't come from actual plants. They're actually synthesized in a lab to mimic the natural compound that is found in a plant. But the inspiration does come from plants. So I find that very fascinating. Some examples of drugs that are used nowadays that are inspired by natural plant compounds are, for example, vincristine, I don't really know how to pronounce these things, but that is a compound found in the Madagascar periwinkle, and it is used as an anti-tumor drug, especially for leukemia. Then another example that I found was digoxin, or digoxin. No, it's probably just digoxin. Digoxin, which is found in the common foxglove, which I find super interesting because when I grew up, I remember in kindergarten my teachers told me, pointed out the foxglove to me and told me not to touch it because it's very poisonous. And it is very poisonous, but apparently in small dosages it's also used as a heart regulator nowadays. So there you have it. So we have all of these modern drugs that we use nowadays that are inspired by natural compounds found in plants. And even though that is the case, even though we have all of these modern medicines and everything is super evolved, I was very fascinated to find out that actually 80% of the world population still relies on herbal remedies as their primary form of healthcare. And that is mainly because herbs are much, 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 much cheaper. They're way more accessible if you have them growing in your garden, or you have friends that you know who have a garden. And they're also way more available than some modern drugs. So there really is no denying that herbal medicine is still very relevant to this day for a lot of people. While I was researching stuff for this presentation, I came across so many different terms and they were all being used kind of in the same way. It got me so confused. Just to list a few of the terms that I encountered, we have herbalism, herbal medicine, botanical medicine, traditional herbalism, medicinal herbalism, folk herbalism, holistic herbalism, clinical herbalism, and phytotherapy. And I was so confused. What the fuck is phytotherapy? Yeah, so to keep this video as simple as possible, I'm just going to explain 3 terms. The first one of these terms is just simple herbalism, because this one is the simplest out of all of them. The term herbalism is really just an umbrella term for all of the other terms that I listed, and herbalism really just means basically the practice of using herbal plants or herbs and plants for health in any way. It incorporates everything. So that's one thing to understand, is that herbalism just is a one big umbrella term. Then we have the term traditional herbalism, which is a herbal practice which relies very much on the traditional uses of a plant, cultural knowledge of a plant, very much the oral traditions of a plant. And it's very much about understanding the plant in its environment as a whole, and in the same way understanding the human body as an interconnected system. Traditional herbalism is also very much, it's a lot more observational. It's based on observations, trial and error, and it can also incorporate elements of spirituality and symbolism and stories that can also be a part of traditional herbalism. And then on the complete other end of the spectrum, we have phytotherapy. Phytotherapy is not based on observations like traditional herbalism. Phytotherapy is completely based on clinical trials and studies. The trials and studies define which herbs are used to heal something. So it's a very science-based form of herbalism. Another interesting thing about phytotherapy is that the products used in phytotherapy, the medicinal products, are often also produced industrially, which means that the difference between the batches of products isn't so big. So you kind of know what you're going to get. With traditional herbalism, you often use the whole plant, or you use like parts of a plant, like the roots or the flowers, and you often don't really know how much of an active ingredient is in the preparation that you're making in traditional herbalism. You kind of have to feel it a little bit more. And with phytotherapy, it's a lot more calculated. So when I figured out those three terms, it really helped me to understand a little bit, because it made me see that there are a lot of different types of herbalism, but they are all herbalism. And I find both of these very interesting. Like, I find the more empirical, oral form of traditional herbalism, with its focus on observations and maybe also a bit more the spiritual side of herbalism, I find that very interesting. And I also find phytotherapy very interesting, with its more like medical, science-based side of things. One of the things that I've been asking myself the most in the last 3 years, where I've been more interested in this topic, is, does it actually work? Does herbalism work? Now, I had this question because I always felt like when I drink a tea, like when I'm sick and I drink a tea, I usually feel that it helps in some ways, but I can't really tell if it helps because the warm water just feels good, or if it's something inside the tea that is making me feel better as well. And that's just one of the questions that I've been having, is like, how do I know if something actually works or not? And so I was really curious to look into some studies for some specific plants to kind of get a feel for if things work, how they work, that kind of thing. And I am going to start with a good friend of mine, Ginger. Alas, well, good morning, people. Wait a second, let me have my notes. I'm a bit tired indeed. It is early in the morning. I'm in what will hopefully be my future home, because I decided to come here for the weekend, and it's not the best place to film at the moment. It doesn't feel very well, since I'm wanting to present research finding, it's not like the most scientific place to be in, but it is a place like no other. So here we are at 7:45 in the morning. Okay, now I guess it's time to look at papers. Do. No. Damn it. My laptop shut down. God damn it. It must be a sign that I was being really bad at this now, so I should do it later, because I'll be better later. So we'll do it later. It's much less cold than it was this morning when I tried to film here. And I've charged my computer, so I hope that this time around my computer won't be so fragile. If I'm being 100% honest with you, I have been really struggling to figure out this like research stuff. Firstly, because this is the first time that I ever read any research papers. So that took me a while. So I spent like 2 weeks trying to figure out how research papers work and reading just a bunch of research, until I realized, it's much smarter to just, instead of reading like individual studies, it makes way more sense to just read like systematic reviews or meta-analysis of a specific topic. So yeah, I only figured that out like 2 days ago. So I've been kind of like trying to film this part of the video over and over again without any luck or success, because I really, even right now, I have no idea how to present this stuff. So bear with me. I'm going to try. Let me sip my tea before I actually start the seriousness of it all. So, talking about ginger. I was really excited about ginger because I was so sure that it would be super helpful for sore throats and coughs, because that's how I use ginger. Whenever I have a cough or a sore throat, I just find that the spicy juices from the ginger really help me. So I went into research thinking that I would most definitely find something there. And I did, but it was only one trial, not one trial, sorry, it was one systematic review. One systematic review, and it was from this year, this January, so very, very recently, and it's the only systematic review that exists about acute respiratory infections, which includes things like sore throats and coughs. And what was interesting about that paper is that they looked into 10,281 different randomized controlled trials, and out of those 10,281 trials, only one had a high enough trial quality to make it into the analysis. So there was almost nothing to work with. So in the end, the conclusion to that one was also that there needs to be more research done. That it's just not studied at all, which is so crazy to me. I really didn't expect that. But then, what is interesting is that ginger actually is really researched when it comes to nausea and vomiting. And there are like different areas of research, and I looked into like three different meta-analyses. One was for ginger for nausea in early pregnancy, one was for nausea in chemotherapy, one was for nausea in postoperative nausea. Yeah. Ginger for preventing postoperative nausea. And all of them say that, or all of them sound quite promising, to be honest. It sounds like the likelihood that ginger helps in those instances are quite high, but almost all of them also say that more research needs to be done for it to be a bit more definite. So that was interesting. All right, so the next plant that I'm going to be looking at is St. John's wort, because I heard a lot about St. John's wort, and that it's supposed to be amazing and magical and stuff like that. And also when I was doing my research into phytotherapy, I was kind of curious to know what are like the top 5 most used herbs in phytotherapy. I'm not exactly sure if there are like top plants used. But one of the plants that did come up quite a lot for phytotherapy was St. John's wort. I looked at 2 different meta-analyses, one from 2023 and one from 2016. So the conclusion to this paper, 2023, is the serotonin, so the SSRIs are widely used for the treatment of depression and can significantly alleviate clinical symptoms and lower the HAMD score. However, due to their strong side effects, they are not recommended. Instead, the use of St. John's wort is preferred, as it is a cheap, readily available and effective treatment strategy for mild to moderate depression with mild side effects. Thus, based on the current meta-analysis and statistically significant results, the use of St. John's wort for depression in adults is strongly recommended. That's crazy. In the 2 weeks that I've been researching plants, I almost never found any papers stating something so clearly. Like, usually it's always like, there may be benefits, or the likelihood of it helping for something is relatively high. But this one is kind of saying, no, it's strongly recommended. That's unusual. Yeah, and also in the 2016 review of St. John's wort, the conclusion is also that St. John's wort is better than placebo in improving depression symptoms and not so much different from antidepressant medication. And what they do say in this paper, though, in this review, is that there's not enough research done on severe depression. And the last plant that I looked into was willow bark. Willow bark is something that I was also really interested in because I had heard on some YouTube video that willow bark is supposedly very good for menstrual cramps. And I used to have quite bad menstrual cramps. So I was really interested in finding ways to relieve my pain other than ibuprofen. And so I bought some willow bark and I started making willow bark teas. And to be honest, I couldn't really tell any difference. I'm not sure. Like around that time, my cramps also started getting better, but I have no idea if it was because of the teas that I was taking or if maybe my hormonal balance was somehow improved. And I don't really know what happened, to be honest. But I was really curious on what the research says for willow bark and pain, because that's another thing that I heard a lot about, was that willow bark is like the original aspirin. And so I was curious. And I thought as well that there was going to be some meta-analysis on that, but apparently there's no reviews whatsoever on willow bark as a form of pain treatment in general. There is a meta-analysis done for arthritis, like using willow bark as pain treatment for arthritis from 2023, but there's no like comparison of willow bark with aspirin, which is very interesting. In the meta-analysis, the conclusion is kind of, that it helps. It seems to work. But it also says that the trials included were potentially biased and had small sample sizes and inconsistencies, and that for that reason the findings are still inadequate and more research needs to be done, as always. But it's still interesting that they, like, in their analysis, they found that it could potentially be helpful for arthritis pain. And then I was hoping again for some sort of meta-analysis or review on willow bark's effects on menstrual cramps, and there was none. But there was one study done in 2019, which was a double-blind controlled crossover study that investigated the efficacy of salix extract on primary dysmennorea, so basically menstrual cramps or menstrual pain. And the finding in this one, so they compared 400 milligrams of daily willow bark capsules and mefenamic acid capsules. And the conclusion was that the willow bark capsules did decrease dysmenorrhea in comparison to the mefenamic acid. It's only one trial, so there's definitely some room for more trials. I guess it doesn't say much about if it actually works or not. It just suggests that it might. But I found that very interesting. So, I guess, those were my research findings. At the beginning, I also wanted to include echinacea, because echinacea is one of those plants that are really hyped, and I was really wanting to add it, but then I also felt like, okay, it's a bit too much. I think it's also a little bit too complicated because there's so much contradictory stuff out there, and I felt like it was a bit too complicated for me for this video. But what do I conclude out of all of this? I don't really know. I have learned there are no hard yeses, no hard no's in research. Everything is a likelihood. When I was starting to research these plants, I was kind of feeling a bit frustrated because I went in really looking for hard answers, and I realized I was not going to get them, at least not in the form that I was hoping. What I kind of make out of all of this is that for most herbs, there just isn't enough research done for there to be any definite answers. It'll be interesting to see what happens when more research is done. And I'm excited to learn more about how to analyze these things, because I'm not very good at it so far. I get very overwhelmed. But we'll see if that gets any better with the next few presentations that I do. Yeah, I guess I'm kind of at the end of my presentation, eh? I guess that was like a really, really superficial overview of what herbalism is. I guess someone else could say it much better than I could. But that's how I made sense of it for me so far. And I really hope that with time I'll be able to expand my knowledge a little bit more, and bit by bit I will know a little bit more about what herbalism actually is. And I'm very excited. I'm really excited. All the things I want to learn, all the plants I want to check out and try stuff with. Yeah. I would be very happy if you come along with me on this journey, and if you happen to know any interesting research done on plants, let me know, because I want to know, especially willow bark. I would like to know if there's more, if there are more studies done on willow bark that I just missed. And yeah, I guess I shall see you in the next presentation. Bye.